You know, the Montauk Project was purportedly a series of secret United States government projects conducted at Camp Hero or Montauk Air Force Station on Montauk Island, Long Island, for the purpose of developing a powerful psychological war weapon. Some thinks it might have been a hoax. No evidence confirming either way. In a moment, we'll talk with Stuart Swerdlow about this and some other major stories on Coast to Coast AM. Of gifted, and I mean a very gifted medical intuitive, Stuart Swerdlow is a clairvoyant who has the ability to see auric fields and personal archetypes as well as read DNA sequences and mind patterns. His great-uncle, Yakov Swerdlow, was the first president of the Soviet Union. And now get this, his grandfather helped form the Communist Party here in the United States in the 30s to ensure that his loyalty stayed with the United States. Stuart was recruited for specific government mind control experiments which enhanced his natural abilities. He spent years in service to various U.S. and foreign government agencies and special interest groups. His mind and body were used for genetic and mind control experiments which led to severe illness, broken relationships, premature Kundalini activation. After several years of deep self-analysis, Stuart merged with higher levels of his multi-dimensional self, which saved his life. He has authored and co-authored with his wife Janet several books and lectures worldwide for a variety of groups, organizations, large corporations. He is our special guest tonight on Coast to Coast. Hello, Stuart. Welcome aboard. How are you?
Fine. Thank you, George.
Man, you have had a varied life and a tough one.
Well, that's putting it mildly. It's been very rough.
How do you bounce back from sometimes those very tough times that so many people have to endure?
Well, you know, it's not a very easy process. Usually there's a lot of phases that you go through, and very often you have to hit an area where you decide to either leave the planet or stay and do something better with your life. And then you have to make a choice of either living, hiding in the closet or going out in the world and making a difference. And so I think that's what actually helped save me, is to know that I had to go out there and do something, but not only for myself, but for everyone else in the world.
Well, good for you. Tell me a little bit more than what I've just given to our audience here.
Well, as you mentioned, my family does have a very interesting background. My father's uncle, or my great-uncle, was the first president of the Soviet Union. And you mentioned about my grandfather starting or helping to start the Communist Party in the United States, which gratefully he failed to finish that project.
Yeah, exactly.
But my grandmother, his wife, was also a Soviet spy during World War II, and there's a lot of interesting information we're finding out about her as well. Unfortunately, my father, being embarrassed about that whole situation, destroyed a lot of the materials about my grandmother, and when she passed away, there was really not much we could do to find out more about her.
Yeah, he would much rather have nobody know anything about what was going on, huh?
Well, basically, yes, but of course I've changed all that by telling everybody everything.
Yeah, exactly. Let's spend some time this hour talking about the Montauk Project, which is fascinating, and tell me about your involvement with this thing.
Right. I need to preface all that by stating that Montauk was really an outgrowth of a lot of situations in the 20th century. You know, after World War II, there was still a fear of what was out there in the world that could affect us. The people were jittery. So the powers that be created the Cold War. And then they created the situation in 1947 with the Roswell situation, which was a staged event. Most people don't understand or realize that. And that was to create the beginning of the revelation of the presence of aliens on this planet. And to make a long story short, when you are a very small group of people who control a tremendous amount of population, armies and weapons really are not enough because you can just be overwhelmed by the population.
Right.
The most brilliant thing that you can do to maintain control is to create a fear in the world and mind control and programming so that people follow along in a certain way and there's no deviation from policy and procedure. And so in 1970, the government opened up underground the Montauk base. Now, the base had been there since the late 1700s. George Washington was actually the first person to commission building the Montauk Lighthouse at the very end of Montauk Point on Long Island.
Long Island, sure.
Because in those days, of course, there was a fear that the British would invade North America, and so he created a small underground area where they could store supplies and weapons in case Long Island was cut off from the mainland of the United States.
Which was a brilliant idea.
Yes, as it really truly was. And then over the years, decades and even centuries, it was added to become a very, very large underground area, so that by World War II, it was actually able to hold underground or undersea submarine pens. And interestingly, during World War II, the people or the population at Montauk, which was very small at the time, because it's a resort area, people are basically only there year-round who live there, it's a very small population, they would notice German U-boats coming in from the Atlantic, submerging, heading towards the point, and then not reemerging until days later, but they were never stopped by any U.S. military. And it's also interesting to note that the only location in North America where the Germans actually made landhead was in Amagansett during World War II, where the German submarine actually let some spies off. They came to the east end of Long Island and made their way into New York City.
And literally partied with people and enjoyed themselves and then went back, right?
Well, actually, they were captured towards the end of the war. But here's the interesting thing, is that they were sent to a federal prison in the United States, and then after the war in 1947, they were executed. Now, the war was over. There was no reason to hold them prisoner anymore, but they executed them. And so one has to wonder, what did these people know that was not allowed to be told in public?
Good point, because I have never heard of an execution on this soil during the World War II era. Beyond this, have you?
Well, I have heard. You remember, my background is such that I have connections to a lot of intelligence information. And unfortunately, this happens more frequently than not in the United States. Of course, it's not in mainstream media.
Oh my gosh. All right. So back to the Montauk Project. So you definitely do not believe it was a hoax, as some believe, right?
Well, obviously, I lived through it, so I know it's not a hoax. You know, when I hear things like that, it's a bit disturbing. It's kind of like someone telling a Holocaust victim that the concentration
It didn't happen.
existed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and you know the sensitivities about that, Stuart.
Yes, and in fact, you know, over the years, I actually, when I was working, doing seminars in Oregon, I happened to meet a man who was a courier for the U.S. government during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, an elderly gentleman. And he said to me that he used to have briefcases chained to his arm, and he worked out of the NSA headquarters in Maryland, and he would be ferried back and forth to Montauk Point with this information, and that he knew that the place existed and that the information is in the archives of the government.
All right, so there are some who believe that this was an extension of that controversial Philadelphia experiment, which took place in 1943.
Yes.
What do you think Project Montauk was all about?
Well, originally it was about, and through the years, it was about mind control and programming and creating a global system where the masses of population could be manipulated. However, they did use electromagnetic equipment. Much of it was created and developed by Tesla and subsequently developed past that point. And they did use equipment that they had from alien technology. And so the project kind of morphed into time travel, electromagnetic weaponry, and genetic manipulation. It was a very wide-ranging project by the time it ended in 1983.